Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second in our series, our October series, kicking off this November 3rd for Lung Month. And our partners at the Lung Association have a quote on their website about Lung Month and the fact that every day we breathe an average of 22,000 times. And most of us never stop to think about our breath and how essential breathing is. But we did want to celebrate Lung Month and talk about this important lung and respiratory hazard. And I have very little to do today because I'm going to hand things over directly to Dr. Kevin Hedges, our own, to moderate the session. But I am excited about the session in diesel particulate and diesel exhaust emissions and influencing change. And it's a beautiful, example of some of the partnerships we've been really working on with the Occupational Prevention Steering Committee, and formerly ODAP, and just in the north where we like to lead the way, we say. So I just very excited to have this group together today, and really starting with Sean and the worker focus. So we really would like to hear the voice of the worker throughout these sessions and showcase how this important integration happens between the science and the worker. And I really also wanted to call out, the McIntyre Powder Project in its work with mining in general, looking at all exposures to miners, which then kind of also diesel is an ultrafine particle similar to the McIntyre powder. So, looking at these shared mechanisms sort of led us down this path and trying to influence change. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kevin to moderate our session today. And Kevin is, I lost it. Give me a second. Kevin has been spearheading this issue for us for a few years, leaning out the diesel working group with ODAP and also with the Mine Legislative Review Commission, working with the subcommittee on ventilation and occupational hygiene. Dr. Kevin Hedges began his career in occupational hygiene in Australia at BHP Environmental Health Lab, where he was employed for 10 years. And it was during this time when he carried out research on diesel emissions in underground coal mines, while working as a regulator for the Australia Queensland Mines Inspectorate, overseeing all metal mines and quarries. He carried out research on crystalline silica as well for quarry and dimension stone miners, and completed a Ph.D. for this work. And he's also worked as a regulator in Newfoundland. Spent some time in academia and has been employed with us. We're so lucky to have him for 6 years. He has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry major, a Diploma of Education, a Master of Science in Occupational Health and Safety, and he's a certified occupational hygienist with the Australian Institute of Occupational Hygienists, where he served on council, and is a certified industrial hygienist with the American Board of Industrial Hygiene. He's also former international president and current board member of the Workplace Health Without Borders International. So over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Kimberly. And I just want to say a couple of things just before I start this session. I just want to say that, I personally want to say I support the education workers and also the Canadian Union of Public Employees in solidarity. Secondly, I just want to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the First Peoples across Canada, and specifically because I'm in Ottawa, I just want to pay my respects to the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So then I'm just going to share my screen now to introduce the session. Okay then. So really, yeah, just being the worker-focused science for prevention session on diesel exhaust exposure and influencing change. These are the speakers. Sean Staddon is going first. He's going to be talking about why, this is important, miners are overexposed to diesel engine exhaust, therefore we need change. An update, and he's going to provide an update of what's happening. I'm going to follow Sean to talk about the past, present, and future diesel exhaust exposure and a tool to assess risk. And then, so when we get to the how, we're really lucky that Professor Sandra Norman's going to talk about as part 3, the USW Diesel Particulate Project, making change happen. And then we have Tobias Mankis from CROSH as well, part 4, the Diesel Project communication strategy. So I'll just get looping back to Sean. Sean is has worked in heavy, so talk about voice of the worker, and we're so lucky to have Sean present to us and, you know, to help lead this project. He's worked in heavy industry as an electrician for over 17 years. My family's all from mining, and my brother was an electrician as well. With almost a decade underground, Sean's had almost a decade underground. Within that time, Sean has been a joint health and safety representative, shop steward, and political action chair for the United Steelworkers Local 6500. Recently, he was appointed to the local's WSIB Worker Representative Office, where he advocates and represents members at all levels of the WSIB appeals process, including the Workplace Safety Insurance Tribunal, otherwise known as WSIB. And Sean has been actively coordinating the USW Diesel Particulate Project since its inception. Okay, over to you, Sean.
I appreciate that, Kevin, and thanks for the awesome introduction. My introduction isn't quite as long as yours, but I'm going to get there. I also I want to take a little time to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe of the Robinson Huron territory. For me, as someone who works in natural resources, I think it's super important not only to support our Indigenous brothers and sisters as they seek out reconciliation and the atrocities of the past, but also, you know, we have to make sure we support them, that they benefit from the profit of the land that was also promised to them in the treaties. With that, I want to just real quickly, as Kevin said, my name's Sean Staddon. I work as an electrician underground at Valley's Mines here in the Sudbury Basin. I've, you know, worked in lots of other industries, but mining is pretty unique. And I like to start with this slide because it's such a powerful message that, you know, kind of embarked us on this project, you know, 2.5, 3 years ago. And it's that Ontario workers, mine workers in particular, have the highest exposure rates to diesel particulate. I'm pretty proud to be a steelworker because, you know, when you think of unions, a lot of people think of the wages and the benefits that come of having unionized work, but our union makes sure that, you know, working conditions and health and safety is at the foremost, you know, priority for all of our members. This goes back many decades, and I like sharing some of our history because without steelworker-led initiatives, we wouldn't be where we are at today. You know, in the 70s, a group of activists attended a health and safety conference in France, and they were from Elliott Lake. They were seeing an overwhelming number of their brothers and sisters becoming ill, and they didn't understand what was going on. While they're at the conference, obviously it came out that the causation was known by government officials. It was due to radiation exposure. And, you know, it's funny today we're talking about, you know, labor-led initiatives with education workers, you know, standing up for the rights. You know, in 74, 1,000 steel workers walked off the job, and that kind of forced the government to put a commission together, and you know, one of the most important pieces of legislation we have was born, and that being the Occupational Health and Safety Act, arguably a piece of legislation that's saved thousands of lives in Ontario. And so I'm really proud to be a steelworker and know that, you know, the people that came before me did that. And so when we talk about workplace exposures in mining, particularly, like, we like to lead. And when we know that there is something not right in the workplace, who else but, you know, my union and my brothers and sisters to take a leading role in it. We've been involved in hundreds of initiatives, you know, some of the biggest being, you know, Stop the Killing, Enforce the Law after the Westerly disaster. We hold chairs at the Mining Legislative Review Committee. We've worked very closely with Dr. Hedges and OHCOW on this. And unfortunately, we've participated in lots of inquests and fatality investigations. And one of our more prouder moments was when Janice started the McIntyre project, and we were more than willing to help coordinate intake clinics with her and watch that project just take off for our Northern Ontario communities. About our local now, we're one of the largest mining locals in the province, representing probably closer to 2,600 active maintenance and hourly employees in the Sudbury Basin. And one thing I am proud of is we also actively represent our pensioners, and that's over 6,500 pensioners at the last count. When we talk about diesel particulate, it really did start probably in 2018, 2019, when OHCOW released the report, and there was a lot of talk at the Mining Legislative Review Committee to lower the OEL, and industry wasn't proposing things that we thought that would help save lives. So we took it upon ourselves, you know, from the WSIB office, from the Political Action Office and Health and Safety, to start reaching out to the Minister of Labor about lowering and having a phased approach about lowering occupational exposure limits. Those letters did not go unanswered, but it wasn't the action we wanted to see. We've written to Minister McNaughton several times, and we haven't really seen any action from the ministry. I believe the same recommendation at that committee has sat there since, you know, before 2020, and it is still, the occupational limit is still sitting at far too high and endangering my brothers and sisters. So, you know, like I said before, if there was going to be one union or one local that needed to change this to save lives, it was going to be 6,500 out of Sudbury. So we decided to, you know, speak amongst ourselves, and we needed the message to get out there, not only to, you know, our members, but we needed the community to back this. We needed to know that, you know, our community understands that there is something going on in the mines that didn't happen decades ago, like McIntyre powder, that's no longer an issue. Not to take anything away from what that travesty did, but this is actively happening to our workers today. So the USW approached CROSH, and we needed to come up with a strategy to reach our miners and get education out there so that we can invoke some action. And the reason this is important, because Ontario employs the most miners of any other province. There's estimates put us around 19,000, but, you know, with the phenomenon of backpack miners and stuff like that, I think it's closer to say that's probably closer to 24,000 full-time workers, people who, you know, work in a project for 6 months, maybe move to another site. It's by far one of the larger industries in our province, and with the most workers. And to that point, we have the highest occupational exposure limit of 400 micrograms. For comparison, Saskatchewan has 160. There is a fairly strong argument to have a harmonized OEL for diesel particulate in Canada. And the hope of this project will be a stepping stone for other provinces to look to Ontario to lead the way, because that's what we do. And we want to be at the cutting edge of health and safety, and make sure that when people pension, they're able to enjoy the years they've put in working. When we talk about diesel exhaust, it's made up of gas and particles. known as soot, and I think everyone in this audience kind of understands what that is. And what we really want to talk about are the diesel particulates that can get deep into the lungs and throughout the rest of the body. Like I said before, the OEL in Ontario mines is 400. And when we talk about the exposure rate, now we're not being dosed with 400 every day, but on an average, mine workers in Ontario of all workers are being exposed at the highest rates. It's unacceptably high, and it needs to be lowered to protect the health and really the healthcare system of Ontario. If I pull up this graph, and I'm just going to kind of move it forward, the graph identifies various occupation exposure levels to diesel particulate. As you can see, mine workers are exposed to 5 times the exposure of dock workers and somewhere around 11 times of construction. The recommended OEL for diesel particulate in mining is 20, and that's represented by that red line. Mine workers then are 10 times more exposed than the recommended occupational exposure limit. And if I go to the next graph, looking at the law and how much is allowed underground, you can see that Ontario is lagging far behind other places of similar jurisdiction. You know, Finland leading the way at the recommended exposure level, and the European Union having a OEL of 50. And so what we've been proposing and approached the ministry about is an OEL of 20 micrograms per cubic meter. We need the ministry to take this seriously, because the implications and the impact on not only the people I work with, the healthcare system, and mining being so generational, brothers, sisters, wives, aunts and uncles. You know, if you work in a mine, and there's a chance that your mother or father worked in a mine, or an uncle, it's generational, and we're seeing impacts of that with lung cancer and all sorts of different diseases devastating families. And through years of exposure, these are some of the things that we're seeing through our office, you know, cancer, cardiovascular disease, IPF, COPD, and onset of worsening asthma. And this is just the start. You know, there's worsening of diabetic, there's all sorts of different disease that can come from the complications and exposure to diesel. And when we look at relative risk, you know, miners have a 1.4 more chance of conducting lung cancer. The probability of an outcome is unconsequential. It's unheard of. And when we look at COPD, you know, 1.2, and IPF at 1.2, simply by choosing to be a miner, you're putting yourself at an unbelievable risk. And that's just socially not acceptable right now in today's age. No one should go to work expecting themselves to get sick after a career. In my office, one of the hardest things that I've had to do is sit across the desk from a widow and fill out survivor benefits and make claims for people. You know, over the last 10 years, we've asked the board to adjudicate and look at somewhere around 57 claims for lung cancer, and we've had 4 be successful that was related to diesel exposure. Now, we know not only is the right-hand number, the claims being successful, not only is that unacceptable, but we also know there's more than 57 of our brothers and sisters that were probably eligible to file claims. We look at bladder cancer, you know, 11 claims submitted over the last 10 years, and we've only had 1 successful. And so that's the kind of thing that we need the public to know about, and that we need to start advocating in the community and talking about exposures and understanding that working underground, there isn't this acceptable thing that you're going to get sick. It's 2022. There should be no one that goes underground that expects to be sick after 30 years. And that's really what this project's all about, and putting that messaging out there and having survivor testimonials so that we can invoke change. I'd like to turn it back over to Kevin, because that's my piece for now, and I'd be happy to take questions after the rest of the panel is gone. Thanks, Kev.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so what I want to do now is just kind of provide a snapshot of the past, present, and future diesel engine exhaust exposure and why it matters. And I want to lead into a tool that OHCOW are developing to assess the risk. And this is something that's very clear to my heart. My dad actually worked in the coal mine for 20 years. Before that, he was a fireman. And so there's just a picture of him there. It was a reunion with a fire brigade that he was a leading fireman at. In 1983, he went to the reunion. And then while in Australia, he was a coal miner in the Illawarra part of New South Wales coalfields. And he passed away about 10 years later at the age of 57. So he was exposed to a combination of hazards underground, which included diesel exhaust and silica. There's been a lot of work done. There's a lot of hyperlinks here, so have a look at them at your leisure. I'm also presenting a slide deck similar to what I presented at the Mining Diesel Emission Council as well. I'll provide a link to this in the chat box. I think everyone should watch this. This was a presentation delivered by Dr. Paul Demers and Dr. Cheryl Peters from CAREX and OCRC, on behalf of the Ontario Occupational Disease Action Plan. But it gives a really good snapshot of diesel exposure across all workplaces. It goes for about 40 minutes, so it's really good to watch that. And I just want to acknowledge assistant partner, Workplace Safety North, who are doing some fabulous work. And Keith Burney, you can see his picture there, and just some new guidance on reducing diesel particulate in underground mines. I'll just quickly give you a snapshot of what we're dealing here. You think about a diesel, the vibration from a diesel engine, there's a hazard there from whole body vibration, the impact and the jarring on the spine. There's also noise exposures. Noise is a big issue in mining, and I guess heat. The amount of heat that's generated from the diesel engines as well. And when you think about the gases, the main gases being carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide. And I'm going to talk a bit more about diesel particulate matter. But before I get to that, I just want to refer to, this was a presentation from Dr. Crystal Pollitt through NDEC. She's talking about nitrogen dioxide underground. And she's looked at providing some correlations between cardiovascular disease from NO2 and also asthma and hospital admissions from asthma. And what she found, what she demonstrated is that, asthmatics are particularly susceptible to being exposed to diesel exhaust, and in particular the nitrogen dioxide as well. So it's not only about lowering the limit for diesel particulate matter. We also need to think about that for nitrogen dioxide as well. And thinking about carbon dioxide, I carry a carbon dioxide monitor around with me. When I go into congregate settings, I'm going to see how good the ventilation is. But this is just some information from Health Canada, and they've actually recommended a limit for residential indoor air at being 1,000 parts per million. And what they say is, as you're exposed to more CO2, the level of tiredness increases, and you get decreased concentration. This is something that was on Twitter feed a while back. Somebody had their car on research, and what they found is very high levels of carbon dioxide. But when they allowed more air to come into the car, so changing the settings that wasn't on research, the tiredness went away, and also the carbon dioxide goes away. So you can kind of think about that, you know. It's an issue, isn't it? High levels of carbon dioxide and tiredness leads into fatigue. Now I want to quickly talk about diesel particulate. Some of you might have seen the slide before. We're talking about nanoparticles. So we're talking about particles that are 0.1 of a micron or 100 nanometers. And these can actually translocate through our membranes and, you know, basically get into all different parts of our body and different organs. And you can see it's pretty widespread. And, you know, there's also issues with unborn babies. But over time, you know, regulations have tightened up and the particulate matter and other compounds have reduced. And I just provided some information here. CanMed are doing some amazing work. They're looking at diesel particulate filters and secondary emissions from diesel particulate filters. So you might want to look at Brent Rubelli's presentation through MDEC. The mass emissions have gone down and the particle numbers have gone down. With the reduction of sulfur, we've got less sulfate, so that's also helped as well. I just want to quickly touch on health effects. You know, the IARC monograph, you know, confirms that diesel exhaust does cause lung cancer, and there's a positive association between diesel exhaust and bladder cancer. And I kind of just provide this again. This is kind of getting older now. This is from the Health Canada, and it's from 2016. But just to show the range of health effects there, and the evidence is tightening up, especially for bladder cancer. I've also just looked at some recent literature linking ultra-fine particulate with brain tumors in adults, and also diesel exhaust exposure associated with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS. So it's really, you know, the evidence is getting stronger of all these different health effects. You know, a lot of the pollution studies, big numbers of people, and they're showing there's correlations between cardiovascular disease and lung cancer mortality. And as Sean alluded to, miners have the highest exposures. And if you think about how many people are exposed across Canada, there's a lot exposed, and there's, you know, the attributable fraction for lung cancer, it's quite high, and also for bladder cancer as well. There's kind of more recently, they're looking at exposure hazard banding and control banding. But if you look at, if say diesel particulate was a chemical in a laboratory, it would have the highest hazard rating. So you really have to have the lowest exposure. Out of the Netherlands, they're really saying that, you know, we really need to get down to the lowest level that we can. And you look at these levels and they're kind of pretty unachievable. You can sort of understand why mines are replacing diesels with electric powered vehicles. I've just taken the recent publication, Canada should move towards adopting harmonized evidence-based OELs to consistently adequately protect workers. I've kind of got a snapshot here, but you see there's still a lot of provinces in Canada that use respirable combustible dust as a measure, as an occupational exposure, with an occupational exposure limit. There's still a lot of people across Canada that are really highly exposed. And there's Ontario, 0.4 milligrams per cubic meter, or 400 micrograms per cubic meter. And then QC, Quebec, Newfoundland, and Saskatchewan have got 0.16 total carbon, and QC and NL 0.4 or 400 total carbon. And there is a ministry of looking at lowering the limit to 0.12. So you can see that in that graph there. There was a consultation process where they were looking at reducing from 0.4 milligrams of total carbon to 0.16 milligrams per cubic meter of total carbon across all workplaces. And now they've revised that, and they're looking at reducing the limit to 0.12 for elemental carbon. I just thought I'd put this in there. The conversion factor that's being used to convert 0.16 to 0.12, they're using 1.3. And when you look at the literature, this conversion factor, it's not really using good science to do that. When you get much lower levels of exposure, the ratio between total carbon and elemental carbon varies. The variability is quite high. And this is just a graph showing once you get below 50 micrograms per cubic meter, there's not a lot of confidence in using conversion factors for TC to EC. Nevertheless, a really good study by Debbia has kind of got a good correlation coefficient for underground mining. I'm talking about, you know, once you get away from underground mining, then the variability is quite high. I think this is probably a better factor. I think 1.6 is better. And if you actually divide 0.16 by 1.6, you end up with 0.1. So many jurisdictions around the world have 0.1. And I just want to quickly introduce the diesel exhaust exposure lung cancer risk calculator. We know that it's a confirmed carcinogen. We know that a lot of people exposed. And there is a meta-analysis or a study where they've combined studies, if you like, and it's in Vermeulen 2014. So they've taken more than 40,000 workers in the trucking and mining industries, which provides a really powerful estimate of the risk of lung cancer. And this meta-analysis, through this meta-analysis, researchers can combine studies, essentially making them into one big study, which may help show an effect. Additionally, a meta-analysis can help increase the accuracy of the results. This is also because it is, in effect, increasing the size of the study. And this is why the trucker study has been combined with the MITRE studies. This is the dose response curve that I've presented a few times before, but there's actually an algorithm that goes with this dose response curve. And this algorithm is actually built into the risk calculator that we're currently working on. It's nearly ready. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. What we need is an estimate of exposure and also duration of exposure. And, you know, this is basically what Vermeulen's saying, you know, with regards to occupational exposures and the risk of cancer from, you know, the exposures and the durations. But the calculator makes this process a lot easier. This was actually a brainchild of John Odick, who built this to help with some of our retrospective exposure reviews. So this Excel spreadsheet is now being put into a calculator. So assuming we do have an occupational exposure limit of 0.1 milligram per cubic meter or 100 micrograms per cubic meter, it still leaves an estimated relative risk of 2.92, well above 2, and there's confidence intervals provided there as well. And that's for 25 years of exposure with an average exposure of 0.1 milligrams per cubic meter. I've also looked at a study done by Zhang et al. And looking at locomotives and the balance crew exposures and the estimated exposure for these people sitting behind the engine, you know, while they're kind of in transit, has been 22 micrograms per cubic meter. Even at that level, we're talking about a relative risk of about 1.4 there. You think about the compensated claims and the accepted versus expected from 7 to 1700. So this is just from a publication from Paul Demers and the hyperlinks provided there. So if you think about exposures internationally, as Sean alluded to, you know, Ontario have quite high limits compared to the world. And, you know, when you think about the exposures here, they're kind of excessive when you look at them compared to international. Even the Australian mining, this is back in 2011, you know, they were having a range of 18 to 44 micrograms per cubic meter for elemental carbon. And their highest exposed was for the loader operators, which is 59 micrograms per cubic meter. And even at that level, they were saying, you know, if for 45 years as an underground miner, experiencing exposure levels at in 2011 at 44 micrograms per cubic meter was associated with 38 extra lung cancer deaths per 100 males. This is just some information provided by Bergowski through MDEC in the US. And this is relevant to us in Canada, and the first 1993 data to 1999 to 2003, and then 2004 to 2005 is from provided from Gary Bonnell, who presented at MDEX. That's where I got that data from. And more recent data presented at the Canadian Association of Research and Work in Health on a survey of 40 mines, reported an average of 0.034, but there's still a maximum of 0.65. And you ask, why is that so high? Why 0.65? And you know, a lot of the older tier engines are not fitted with diesel particulate filters. Perhaps that's the reason. And this is just a presentation from Glenn Staskas from the ministry, really back in 2014, just showing how many diesels were fitting with DPFs at that time, but I think that's greatly increased now. So when you tease out the data from the survey, even though it's pulled like for 5 years, when you look at it by year in a year-by-year basis, there's quite a reduction. There's about a 10% reduction. And when Melanie, Dr. Melanie Norman did the statistical analysis, she did show that that reduction is significant. You know, it's really from that survey, the level of exposure in 2018 is down to 0.03. So you can sort of think about like the number of exceedances against the proposed limit. You know, if we project that forward, at the moment it's about 10% exceedance. If we project that forward in 2022, it'll probably be close to 5%. So I guess there's a rhetorical question. Why set a limit at 0.12 when you know that, you know, these mines, 40 mines, will meet that? Anyway, just back on the calculator that we hope to present on 24th of November. Even if you put 30 micrograms per cubic meter in the calculator, we're still getting a relative risk of about 1.5. So just quickly, I'm sorry, I'm just going to check the time here. I think I'm doing okay. Yeah, you know, workers in Ontario, their exposure levels that may cause lung cancer. From the survey, 72% of elemental carbon measurements representing diesel engine exhaust exposure exceeded the ORC recommended health-based limit value of 0.02 milligrams per cubic meter, or 20 micrograms per cubic meter. If you think about it, let 20 be the limit. And they're representing exposure between 2014 and 2018. So when compared with the proposed statutory limit of 0.12 milligrams per cubic meter of elemental carbon, 10% exceeded this proposed compliance-based limit. This exceedance will likely be lower in 2022, closer to 5% exceedance perhaps. So, you know, respiratory protection along with a full respiratory protection program will be required until exposures are reduced. And the results also suggest an encouraging trend of annual reductions in exposure levels for EC at 10.7% per year, and progress towards reducing the risk of occupational lung cancer for Ontario miners. And I've kind of thought long and hard about this. And when I was at MDEC, I actually really want to pay my respects to MDEC. You know, David Young led that group a while back, and now I think Brent Rubelli's leading it. They've done a fabulous amount of work, and I really think that's been the driver for the reduction as well. And I just want to acknowledge Dr. Dorman and Dr. Arundale, and also Ali Shakil from the University of Toronto. And I also want to send out a special acknowledgement to Mark Cousineau. The occupational hygiene community is fairly tight. We all kind of network and work together. So Mark's been, you know, great advocate and looking after the health and safety across Ontario as the provincial occupational hygienist. And that's me. So the next speaker after me is Professor Sandra Norman. So Dr. Sandra Norman is a full professor in the Faculty of Health at Laurentian University and Director for the Center for Research in Occupational Safety and Health, otherwise known as CROSH. Dr. Dorman completed a doctoral degree in physiology and pharmacology and a research program focuses on health promotion and disease prevention in the occupational setting. She has authored over 40 papers and received over $6 million in research funding. And I just want to reach out my warm thanks, Dr. Dorman, for volunteering her time today to offer to present. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And you two are a hard act to follow. There was a lot of great information there. You got the best data slides, Kevin. Okay, I'm gonna pull up my presentation and I'm gonna try and give you a little sense of my thoughts for this talk today. Sean has given you sort of the background history of where this project started. And the next speaker, Tobias Mankis, he's going to give you sort of an update on where the project, like what the project is and where the project's going. And Dr. Hedges, of course, gave you the background historical on health for, you know, why do we care about this topic? And what I was trying to do, and I hope this is useful for the attendees today, is make the connection around change, right? Because I think many of us are grappling with how to make change within our communities. And so in connecting the themes, I wanted to try and give you some tidbits on what I've learned and what we try to apply in different projects to make change, and also so you can sort of see what we were doing behind the scenes in this particular project. So with that, I will dive into it. I haven't done this presentation before, so fingers crossed it comes together okay. So the background scenario, right? I think we can all agree. We know that there has been prolonged, unchanged legislation in Ontario around diesel particulate matter. And in fact, you know, when I first started looking into diesel, if back in like 2003, ACGIH had given their first notification around reducing the standard in 1995. So like prolonged, unchanged legislation in Ontario around diesel particulate. And despite, I mean, I think, you know, Kevin outlined it really strongly, I think, that there's widespread acknowledgement and agreement about the hazards of diesel. We know it's a carcinogen. We know the more you're exposed to, the more likely you are to get sick from it. There's also widespread acknowledgement and agreement that the levels are too high. And in fact, Kevin highlighted that, you know, really we want to get as low as possible, right? In terms of exposure to diesel. And seriously, I didn't see Kevin's presentation until today, but he set me up so perfectly because, you know, he also really highlighted that despite the development and implementation of some pretty terrific technologies that are able to meaningfully reduce these levels. And so it's a bit of a disconnect in trying to understand, with all of this understanding, why hasn't there been change? And so Toby's going to talk to you about the efforts that we're making to try and get the ball rolling on that change. But again, this happens in a lot of scenarios. And so I wanted to try and address some of the challenges around making change happen. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So how do we create change? And so first, you know, recognizing that we need to engage and motivate our communities to make change. And when I talk about community, you know, in this context, we're probably talking about workplace communities, right? But really a community can be very small or very large, and you can have communities within workplaces, right? You could talk about all hygiene specialists as a community. You could talk about your personal communities, right? It could be your church group. It could be the city that you're from. And so first and foremost, when we're looking at organizational change, we kind of want to stop and ask ourselves, who's the community that we're looking at? And then we want to really understand that community, right? So who's the priority population in this community? Maybe ask other questions like, where are they located? Because, you know, whether you're talking within a building location, that will have a meaning, as well as geographic location. And we also want to look at, you know, I'll read it here. How well have the identified needs been addressed in the past? And this kind of goes to the culture and understanding your organization. Because if you want to make change, and part of the reason I think that we're currently struggling in so many workplaces to make change is because efforts have not been successful, and or the workers don't feel like they were listened to, and so when you bring in a new change for them, there's more pushback against it. And so one of the themes, I guess, in creating community change is that there's a constant underground building and of goodwill between your community or within your community while you're even before you initiate your program. And USW is a great example of that, because they're constantly communicating and building, I think, trust within their organization, which is what allows them to build the change opportunities on top of that, right? And of course, within an organization or within a community, we also have to look at individual change, because we're trying to move the collective, but to move the collective, we still have to push each individual and kind of, it's like herding cats, right? And get everybody running in the same direction. And so we also want to look at some concepts around, okay, how do you motivate the individual? And in examining those pieces, we might want to look at what their connection to the community, to the larger community is, because that can help you strategize how you're going to outreach to them. What's the culture in the community? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but you know, you can either, if your strategy aligns with the culture, you're going to have more success, right? Than if your strategy is at cross purposes to the beliefs of the organization, right? And then also, what are you asking them to do, and how does it align with their current demands, priorities, and needs? Because again, it will be, if you're asking them to do something that is aligned with the things that they're currently doing, maybe it is part of the same, you know, some people have instituted the lean program. If it fits with the lean program, it will be easier to adopt. But if it doesn't fit, then you're going to need to put more effort into making the change. So let's kind of go through a few steps. So first and foremost, if you're trying to initiate change, you want to start with the people who care. And that's in two ways, I would say. First and foremost, you want to identify your partners. And partners within your community, I mean, some of your partners should absolutely be people that are in your community, because they will understand that community, and they will likely already care about the community and about the change, right? So your partners are people who will help, who will be your first collaborators and will help shape your change. they'll also have the skills that you need to guide through the change process. So in that second point as well, I also encourage people when you're looking at partners to look outside of your organization as well. I really believe that the most successful problem solving often occurs when you bring together really diverse people with really different backgrounds. I'm always fascinated by how, you know, you bring in someone from a completely different area and you think there will never be a crossover of understanding in sort of what we're, you know, what the goal is. And yet they'll look at the problem in such a different way and they'll come up with such a clever solution or a clever way of approaching it that you never would have thought of if you hadn't brought in different people. And so I think particularly for big problems, for problems that have been long running, maybe like the diesel particulate problem, those are the problems where we really need to bring in more diverse people to try and figure out how do we make the change, right? So start there. Once you've built your team, then you want to look within your community itself and understand that there are different types of people. And if you look at the literature around this, you know, some people break it up into 4 types of people, some people break it up into 8 types of people, but there's a general theme here around who are going to be 150% in your corner and who are going to just create barriers at every level, right? And you need to think about these and you need to address each of them. The easy ones are obviously your vocal supporters and your champions. These are a group of people who probably have higher levels of ability to help make the change. They don't really need to be convinced that the change is important. And they also, I think, probably have the capacity. You know, we talk about this bandwidth still, right? There are people within our organization that are going to be at any given moment more overwhelmed or more burnt out, especially right now, right, than at other times. And so you need to, I mean, in change initiatives too, you need to not always be relying necessarily on the same champions for that reason, but recruit your vocal supporters and help give them any additional tools that they need to help you spread your message. And I'll talk just briefly too about the vocal resistors. Some people will say, don't spend your time or energy on the vocal resistors because you won't convince them. That may be true. It may be true depending on your topic. But the literature also shows that people are more willing to accept change, even if they don't agree with it, if they were consulted and if they had opportunity to complain about the change before it happened. And so it is important, especially the bigger the issue, it is important to ensure that you give opportunity for everyone within your community to ask questions, to criticize, to provide alternative suggestions. So again, some of your best ideas on actually compromising and creating a final outcome is based on these people who are less thrilled about the change, right? And so when you're crafting your strategy as well, you want to be aware that these people are here and put your mindset around it to not be going in and being personally resistant to these people who are more hesitant, right? You're not going to get them on board by getting in an argument right off the top. You're going to get them on board by inviting them to the table, legitimately listening to their complaints, and then trying to come up with solutions. And again, if at the end of the day, you cannot compromise on the idea, they will still be more willing to accept it and move forward at the workplace if you'd listen to them. One of the other things we talk about around challenges and barriers. And actually, is this concept of inertia. And you've probably heard about this recently as well, right? It's this feeling that, I mean, people get used to their routines. It's very difficult to push people outside of their routines. And anytime you're trying to implement a change within your community, you generally have to push them out of their routine, and they don't like that. And so I want to talk about some of the different ways you can push an individual or an organization to try and get past that inertia. But I'll preface this with as well by saying that even when you push past the inertia, especially in the early stages of the change, people will still have a tendency to gravitate back to the old behavior. And so you do have to continue to be persistent for a time frame. So how do you combat inertia? And I'm going to focus on 3 key ways here. The first is this idea of crisis, which we don't really want to hear about because we've all lived through crisis. And actually, you know, the leaders on this topic always talk about crisis is opportunity. And that is so true. The biggest changes will happen when there's a crisis. And so, I mean, the pandemic is a great example. This was a crisis. A huge proportion of society was told to go and work from home. And out of that, our technology advanced like 10 years within a year to adapt to that forced change. It wasn't easy. People were stressed, but massive change occurred. And on a personal level, lots of people look at personal crises in the same way. A divorce is often connected to multiple changes in the individuals because so many other things, so many patterns were broken in that crisis. And so on the one hand, I don't think we want to create crises to make change, but if you're a good leader, you want to always be aware of crises in the background and recognize that if it comes up, it's an opportunity to institute positive, meaningful change. Okay, so the other more commonly used strategies are social obligation and empowerment involvement. And so on the social obligation point of view, there's 2 ways. The first is the best, where you build it in the long term. And this is what I'm talking about, like that constant networking within your community of building trust and outreach, so that when you ask somebody to do something for you, they're more willing to do it, right? At the same time, if you can't do that, and I think you'll see this with this project as well, is that, like, if I'm trying to get somebody to participate in a study at the very basic level to just fill out a survey for me, if I send out a mass email, that's very little work on my part, and I'm going to get very little response back, right? So what working for it means is I probably need to do some face-to-face time with people and engage them on a personal level. And that's what we're trying to do with this project too, is how do you, and I mean, this is examples like politicians going out door to door, shaking hands, right? They're putting in the work to give you the opportunity to have the conversation and to convince you of why you should be motivated to do what you want them to do. And the third piece is really to empower the person in terms of how they can do it. People who have more choice are more empowered to do the action that you're asking them. And at the same time, if they feel involved, again, involvement's really critical. If they feel involved in the effort, they're more likely to do it. And I like to insert this one here. The golden rule around change is also that both you as the person who's trying to motivate and the people that you are trying to get on board with you, they need to believe that change is possible. If you don't believe that the change is possible, then you're dead in the water. So how do you get people to care and believe about your project? Well, these are some of the classic methods in engaging. And I'll start with education. And I know we have to be careful with education because educational initiatives are extremely overused. They're often perceived as boring. And you don't know what people are thinking when they look at your initiative, and they may very well not, if the initiative doesn't align with their beliefs and their perceptions, then you've turned them off before you've even tried to start. And I put this example up here. This is an education intervention around psychosocial hazards in the workplace that we did with wildland firefighters. And we worked really closely to develop these images of the people so that the workers could see themselves in the information. And they, like, right down to making sure that the insignias were right. They cared about that. And actually one of the characters, with permission, was based upon somebody within their organization that they really liked and respected, and also had a bit of a humor to them. And so then they want to put the poster up on the wall and they want to engage with the program. So how do you get it? It's more than just saying X equals Y. It's also trying to get your audience to engage with the material. And at the same time, because of this first point, we want to try and keep it simple. And trust that people will look for the information, the level of information that they need, if you provide them ways to track that. So I also want to highlight the concept of telling stories. This is less used, but way more powerful, I think, than educationals. People naturally identify with storytelling. We've used it for thousands of years to make points with people. And I mean, I put this up as a simple example. Kind words can be short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless. So you read that and you remember something kind that somebody said to you that you've held on to, right? And whether it's a sad story, stories, you can embed them with messages and people can imagine that story happening to them. And that's much more powerful than almost anything else you can do. And so if you look at ways that you can embed storytelling, you can use testimonials. Virtual reality is becoming popular for this very reason, right? If you can imagine that you're going to actually fall when you're doing an act, that's going to be much more memorable than me telling you you're going to fall, right? There's other ways. I always tell people it's so important to personalize the issue. You need the audience to believe that there's a real risk or a real benefit to them to make the change. And keeping in mind that this can be particularly difficult if the risk isn't an immediate risk. And diesel particulate is an example of that. We're telling you, and you probably believe us, that diesel is a carcinogen. But we're also telling you that you're probably not going to get it in, for 20 years. And so how do we get you to care about yourself 20 years from now, right? That's hard to do. And so the ask needs to be a little bit reflective of that. So either you need to ask and ask and ask a lot more, or you need to make the ask a lot simpler so it still fits with a functional reality for them. And so that's the last little piece here around motivating people. I'm going to say, keep it simple, set your goals accordingly, and be immediate of both the be mindful of time, both in the immediate and the long term. So keeping it simple, it's not, ideally, you're going to have a very short list of things that you're asking your community to do, right? And if you have to ask them to do more than one thing, you better be sure that you've put the priority issue at the top, because expect that people won't do everything on your ask list. The people with the biggest capacity will be able to do it. The people with the lowest capacity will likely be good if they can get the top one off your list. And so you need to know that and plan for that going in, right? And it helps, this third point here, it actually does help if you acknowledge verbally that you know you are creating a new demand for that person on top of the demands that they already have. That it's a personal social thing, and it makes people have a little bit more resilience to do what you are asking them to do. And at the same time, because of those demands, particularly, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, provide as much support as possible to facilitate the ask that you're giving them. And in line with that, I set the, I wasn't sure if I should keep this title, Set the Bar Low. Why am I saying set the bar low? Not because I want the change to be low. It's just that the bigger the ask that you're giving, the larger the change, the harder it is going to be for them to do. And so if you can consider that and maybe stage your request or chunk it out so that they're smaller pieces, you'll get better success that way. More people will jump a low bar than will jump a very high bar, right? I mean, we use this in exercise all the time. You don't ask somebody to start exercise and then tell them to go out for an hour run. We tell them to go out for a 10-minute walk. Why? Because they can achieve a 10-minute walk and they're much more likely to do it, right? Also, the more options you can give people who feel like they can make a decision about how they do it or when they do it are less stressed and more likely to be able to do it, right? Oops. And lastly, you know, develop your evaluation accordingly. If knowing that not everyone's going to get it, don't set your evaluation to be 100% of people. What's a reasonable and meaningful, successful outcome for your community? So around time, you know, be honest with the person about how long it's going to take for them to complete a task. Make sure you plan out the timeline for your project, and that's important for your team too, because they've got to build it into their schedules. And the longer the timeline, the more effort is going to be required to keep your topic front of mind when all the other topics are coming out on you. And this is just a general rule of thumb. It takes people about 4 to 6 weeks to learn a new routine and to accept a new idea. So even when a change is enforced on somebody again, you have to give them time to adopt and to adapt. And if you don't, expect more chaos and upsettedness. So I am pretty much out of time. So I'm just gonna say one last thing here, because this is not gripping stuff, but there are a lot of community models that are available that purposefully take you through a process of planning out your approach. And so I've listed some of the popular ones. And also just to let you know that for the Diesel Particulate Project, we used what's called an ADDIE model. We felt that this project was an educational intervention. And so the ADDIE model goes through a series of steps to analyze the situation, design the components of the training, develop the phase, and then implement this plan and evaluate the success of the plan. And Toby's going to talk about all of that in terms of the actual project. I don't want you to read this at all. I just put this up to show you it was a very purposeful stage by stage organization of our objectives, our outcomes, and what's missing here is when we go back in and we evaluate whether we achieved all of those outcomes to tell us whether the project was a success. Obviously, this project was led by the USW, but our co-pilots, if you will, our team, there were people behind the scenes with USW in addition to Sean, Malcolm Mills, Jerry Thibault, JP Mrochek. In addition, you're going to meet Toby next, but George Flagler did a lot of work on this project as part of his student work. And on the OHCOW team, you've already talked and heard from Dr. Hedges, but I want to shout out as well to Andrew Zarnke, who did a lot of work on this project as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Mankis. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Dorman.
I can stop sharing now.
I could just do your bio first, Toby, if you like.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Hedges.
Stop sharing.
Yeah.
There we go.
So just providing a bit of background for Toby Mankis. He actually has a BA from the Royal Military College and a HBSc in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. He's also from CROSH, as Dr. Dorman said. He has a master's in Science Communication, which is really interesting, from Laurentian University. And as the Marketing Communication Specialist at CROSH, he assists with communication planning and design. Thank you so much, Dr. Dorman, and it's great to have you, Toby. Over to you.
Oh, thank you very much for that fantastic intro. So I will share my screen and kick off. Okay, so as Dr. Dorman said, and kind of continuing on in that vein, is looking at, kind of the nuts and bolts of our communication strategy. How did we actually go about implementing the project, and how's it gone so far, and where we're kind of headed? So our very first step, and this kind of goes for any type of communication, is, we knew kind of what we wanted to accomplish, but we had to figure out who our target audiences were for this. And I just want to kind of kick off with a nice quote, which I like, from Ken Hamer. Designing a presentation without an audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. And I just, I enjoy that. And it, obviously it says presentation, but I think that applies to any piece of communication. So we need to really figure out who it is we're having a dialogue with, and who it is we're trying to influence, or as Dr. Dorman said, who it is we're trying to have like a behavioral change with. So in this particular case, we identified our target audiences as mine workers and their families, health and safety personnel and health and safety inspectors, and as well as the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. And so for each of these audiences, we need to keep in mind, what's their prior knowledge on the subject of diesel particulate? What is it they value? For example, like in terms of mine workers, as it was mentioned, a huge part of it is that generational tradition and that pride in their work. What about familiarity and trust? Will our audiences trust us as the project, as USW, as CROSH, as OCCOW? Where are we in that relationship? And are there going to be some barriers to communication that we need to consider? Are there things that might get in the way? That could be technological or cultural. And so this is kind of what we thought about in terms of our target audiences, and we tried to make sure that then that's kind of played through in everything we developed and built. And so once we know our audiences, and we kind of next have to figure out like our key messages. And this kind of a lot of this tends to be focused more towards the mine workers and their families, but really it's for everyone as well. And when I say key message, that's what we want people to walk away knowing. That's what they walk away understanding. So we had 3 key messages that we went back time and time again to make sure every when we made a brochure, if we made a sticker, any kind of outreach was in line with these messages. So the first one being that mine workers are being overexposed to harmful diesel particulates. Second, diesel particulates cause occupational diseases. And third, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development must reduce the occupational exposure limit for diesel particulates. So those are, the core of our entire communication strategy, making sure that these messages get communicated and understood by our target audiences. And so I'm going to use this third point here, we must reduce the occupational exposure limit, to just give you an example of how we built, for example, just like a slogan that we're using for sticker and that we're putting into brochures and infographics. And so we start off brainstorming and, just in the design phase, what can we do? And so this was our grad student, George Flagler, who's really good at sketching and illustrating. And we're just, spitballing ideas. It's like, okay, we like the idea of a heart. We like the idea of lungs, because these are some of the organs that are affected by diesel particulate. And we also like the idea of 20, because that's our goal is 20 micrograms per meter cubed. Okay, so we've got some of our core concepts, and then we just iterate. So I'll show a few of the iterations, but there are many more than this for kind of everything we did. And you can see how we're starting to refine it, getting an idea, building and building until we get closer and closer to what in this case was this final slogan, which we've got in our we've got stickers and in our infographics. You can see the progression, and again, many more steps than that. And that was for every piece of every asset that we made, was this iterative process of kind of refining and making sure everyone on the team was on board from all sides, like USW, CROSH, lots of conversations, which are fantastic. And that's how we came up with something that, we were all happy with. And so taking those key messages again and looking at, okay, so how do we then take that and actually make, kind of educational and influential materials? And so again, we went to the Blackboard, and this is, a great way to, to get ideas across. I love whiteboards. I love blackboards. Is we just, we brainstormed and we started throwing down ideas. Okay, so we've got this idea of you've been overexposed. That's one of our key messages. What do we want to say that will help our audiences understand that message of you've been overexposed? And so we started throwing things on the Blackboard, some of which, stayed, some of which got cut, but it's getting those ideas down so that other ones can build off that. We did the same for, it's a known hazard, it's causing occupational diseases. What can we do that will reinforce that message? And then looking at that regulations must change. The OEL needs to be 20 micrograms per meter cubed. How do we show that? And so from that, it's like, okay, we've got some ideas. How would we, potentially lay that out? How do we show that? And I think this is a cool kind of example, because this was way back in May and June that we threw this on the Blackboard. And I'm going to contrast what you're seeing here with one of our final projects. It's actually really neat to see, how kind of close we were in terms of, our layout and what ended up working. So you can see here on the left, we've got our, our initial Blackboard sketch, and after many iterations, we have an infographic, which you can kind of see the relation of, our three key messages horizontally laid out on the page, both digital and in print. And you can see how they kind of correspond here with, first key message being on top, you're being overexposed, it causes occupational diseases, and the OEL must change. And so that's how it moved through there. And at the same time, we ended up using, the other layout for our brochure. And you can see, 1, 2, 3 key messages. And we ended up, having subtitles of, essentially what were the key messages, so to really hit it home. And this actually plays into, there's a type of communication method called like the assertion evidence approach, which works for slide design and other types. And it's very successful at, for people remembering and absorbing information, in which case you have like a assertive statement up top, backed up by visual evidence. So again, assertive statement up top, visual evidence backing up, assertive statement, evidence kind of filling it out. And so I'll point out that we ended up here, the last thing we wanted was kind of like our call out, what to do. So you've got this information, now here are the steps we'd like you to do to affect change in this project. And one thing I'd like to point out here is you can see small little numbers besides graphs and other infos, and those are our references. So we couldn't really fit them in the actual brochure, but it's very important, to include those. Obviously, we all know this, but we want to make sure that those are accessible for, our audiences. And we did that through on the website. There's like a QR code on the brochure that people can go with their phone, or they can enter the website address, and they'll take them to the actual website. And so you actually, for those of you, if you're, I guess you can keep watching the presentation, but you could scan this even on your phone right now, and this will take you to the website that Sean created, which is fantastic. And within the website, then we've got all our references laid out. Now, are most people reading our brochures and infographics, are they going to go and dig into the references? No, they're probably not. But we, absolutely decided that they absolutely must be open and, available to access as a method of, credibility. We wanted to show that, we're not making this up. We're basing this on science and we're doing the very best we can to explain this. And so here, we're open with our sources, establishing and kind of maintaining that credibility. So that was very important that references are available for anyone who wants to look deeper into it. And so once we kind of, started thinking, we've got our assets, we've got our target audiences, how do we actually, go about doing the communicating of like who needs to learn what and who's going to talk to who? And that's where we came up with, where we used the concept of communication maps. And so we purposely decided who was responsible for each group and who would communicate with each group. And you'll see that the chaos set is my whiteboard writing. So this is absolute nuts, but this is, we're brainstorming, we're throwing things on the whiteboard using different colors. And from that, we translate that. Actually, well, George Flagler, a grad student, had the unenviable task of making my writing into actual slides. And so here I'll kind of introduce them that we've got, our stakeholders, we've got CROSH, we've got the folks at USW like Sean and Malcolm and Jerry who are involved. We've got our target audiences. We've got who we're calling the trainers. So that's kind of our champions for the cause. Like Dr. Dorman was saying, these are people who can influence change. We've got Safe Work Associates as well, our partners with the project, and the media. And then what we do is we figure out how are these different lanes of communication going to work. So we started off with, what we call our heads up, and that's letting people know this project is starting up. Here's our goals. Here's kind of what we're thinking. And so we laid out who's going to talk to who. So okay, CROSH, we're going to start letting the Safe Work organizations know. The USW folks are going to start letting the trainers know, which includes the greater USW population, Sudbury District Labor Council, MPPs, other leaders, and other organizations. And then we did this for kind of every stage of our communication. So we've got the heads up, we've got what we call the trainer. It's just, and then this stage is when we engaged who will be our champions and giving them the background on the science behind it. So kind of like a very light version of what Dr. Hedges talked about, like the science behind diesel particulate, giving a background of the history of the USW's involvement, and so giving them the knowledge and power so that when the project launched, they can be our supporters and they can be with it. So like Dr. Dorman says, getting them on board and making them part of the team. Next, we looked at the core content, and this one's going to be pretty crazy, and I don't expect you to follow along all the lines, but just to show that this is, what we thought about and what we planned out. And so looking at how are we going to share brochures and assets and who's going to what. And, it is very complicated and you kind of have to look at it bit by bit, but in a written document, it does work. And it was very helpful just as a process to figure out, are we talking to everybody? Is there anyone we're missing? How can we fill in any gaps? And so just, as one example, pulling at a few of the arrows, who's going to be talking to the ministry, for example. And so we decided, okay, so it's probably going to be the MPPs, CROSH a lot through Dr. Dorman, through the different councils she sits on, and the Safe Work Associations. And so, okay, so that's who's going to be talking to the ministry. And we did that for, every target audience, figuring out who's going to be talking to who. And then we also planned out, our return communications as well. What do people do when they have questions? And we planned it out, bit by bit. Again, the details aren't really important other than the main concept is that we try to, think this all through, map it out so that we could, put in plan or put into effect everything that we planned. We also did a lot of brainstorming on the actual medium of communications. What's the best way to get this across to our target audiences? Is it billboards? Is it TV ads? Is it Google ads? Is it brochures? Is it infographics? And so we just, again, that brainstorming phase was so important to us to, no idea was a bad one. We threw it on the board. Then we kind of scaled it based on how much it would cost and how much time. And then again, George went and made it look all understandable. And yes, we made a list of everything that we could possibly do, how much it would cost, how much time it would take. And then based on that, knowing, every project has limited resources, where do we get the most bang for our buck? Where can we make the most change through different media? And so where does that bring us now? So to kind of show how we got here, so this is all this planning that I've been talking about was early summer 2022, that analysis design phase, the developing. Then when it came to September 22, that's when we did the train the trainers, and that was a joint presentation by the USW and CROSH to a large, key people within USW and within the community, MPPs and other leaders, letting them know again that this project is coming. We need you to be champions, and here's what it's all about. And so that by the end of October, we were able to launch the website that Sean did such a fantastic job on, and start the social media campaign as well. And so I'll touch on that just to kind of show you how it's going so far. So this all kind of kicked off, like I said, end of October. So within less than 3 weeks, 774 unique visitors have been to the project website of dieselparticulateproject.com. Through that, there's been 93 form submissions for the voluntary work registry. And so I know like Sean has got his hands full, and this is just the website. Twitter, we're kind of, still building on. We've got 29 followers on Twitter, but on Facebook, 241 followers on the Facebook group. And so that's a big part of it. And Sean is posting things out regularly. Then CROSH will go and they'll retweet. And then our Safe Work Association partners are also doing that. So it's getting the word out. And what has also started happening is people from the USW, so like Jerry and Malcolm and other folks, they're actually now out in the community. They were there earlier this week in the Hanmer Shopping Center, giving out stickers, giving up brochures, talking to people, say, hey, this is what's going on with this thing that's called the Diesel Particulate Project. Here's why we think you should know about it. Do you have questions? Getting the wider, broader community involved through face-to-face interaction. Going to Canadian Tire, then heading down to South Sudbury and getting out into the community and building it out there. And so what were they sharing? So these are some of the assets we developed. And so we have our 3 project logos or slogans, reinforcing again our key messages. There are 3 key messages that you're being overexposed, that the center one here you can see, like, we need to change regulations, and that clean air, healthy body, that diesel particulate causes occupational diseases. And we were very conscientious in our wording. And so there's many different ways that we could have approached these different logos and slogans, but we made sure in the end to frame things in a positive manner. So for example, clean air, healthy body, positive, achievable. Rather than focusing on the negative, we wanted to show positive to more effectively bring about the change, to give people hope that yes, we can make change, and we actually can. And of course, it was very important to get everything translated. So this was through the fantastic work of the translation office at Laurentian University, translated all our assets. And then, as I kind of showed a little bit before, we have our brochure. This is the outside of it, explaining kind of what diesel engine exhaust is and how the different sizes affect us. Then getting into our key messages with our take-homes, with supporting visuals. We've got infographic, 1 page, 8.5 by 11, that succinctly hits all the key points, and then also, tells them what to do. Fill out a WSIB exposure form, and go on the website, fill out the worker registry. And then same thing with what we're calling, our 1 pager, 8.5 by 14, a bit more in depth. This was developed more for the trainers as a handout during the presentation, but it's a great document that we're using to more further explains some of the details. So that's what we've developed so far. And so what are we looking at next is, so in November, we're going to be looking at getting our video testimonials released. And so as I mentioned, when we were looking at the values of like our target audience of mine workers and having that sense of that generational pride in their work, it's like, okay, so actually getting mine workers and families and who are affected by diesel particulate, getting them on video saying how it's affected them and why it needs to change. And so taking, what we call in communications, like that pathos approach, like talking to people's feelings, and that can be a huge influencer. And this, targeting the core values of our audience. And so those will be coming out in the next couple weeks or so, and there'll be short snippets on social media and a longer 5 to 7 minute video available. That's going to be really powerful to view, because it's real people and real people being affected by diesel particulate. At the same time, our news release is coming out soon, and so getting the media behind us. And then in December 2022, so next month, we're looking at Town Hall on December 8th and intake clinics. And so this is when broader communities involved, talking about the project, but also having tables set up with volunteers where people come in and say, hey, I need help filling out an exposure form. And we sit them down and kind of help them through the process of that. And then in the new year, the idea being that we can send a comprehensive report to the ministry saying, hey, we've got 2,000 exposure forms. We need to affect change on occupational exposure limits for diesel particulate, and here's all the reasons why it needs to happen now. So that's kind of a sneak peek of what's coming up and where we've been. But then once we get to the panel, absolutely open to questions and discussion on that. And then I'll turn it back over to Sean.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. I'm really excited about this, the website that's launched, and I know Janice is here too, and a lot of that is success is from her already having a reach at the community. So, having Janice boost something or retweet or put something on Facebook to her audience in the analytics of the website, I can 100% see when someone like Janice and the McIntyre powder reaches her audience, and it's measurable, and it's exciting to see. So we're just in the infancy stages, but I can already predict a whole lot of work, and I'm super excited to see how far we can go, and obviously at some point talk to the Minister of Labor about what's going on in our mines here in Ontario. I'll let kind of Kevin moderate if there's questions or anything from the panel, if we wanted to move to that, Kev.
Sure, Sean. Just to let everybody know, this is being recorded because I did get a note that when I presented, I went a bit fast and I had a lot of information to cover. So, you can actually see it again. And the slides for both my presentation and Sean's presentation are going to be posted on the OHCOW side anyway. So just be patient. I just want to also kind of reflect on words from a woman on the board of directors, Workplace Health Without Borders, Lydia Renton. And she says it takes a village. And, it's so great to see this kind of work evolve this way. I remember presenting on diesel exhaust like a long time ago. And, I was really trying to lobby for things to happen. But it just really makes me feel proud just to see everybody working together so well on this. And I just want to, and I also want to thank you to the speakers, to Sean, Sandra, and Toby, and really, giving us so much credibility as well. So that's I just wanted to make mention of that. And I also just want to quickly, before we open the panel discussion up and answer the questions, we do have a calculator that's being built, and I just want to say thank you to Alan Powell and Leslie Sheeny, who's done some fantastic work there. It's not quite ready to launch yet, but and Kimberly might talk a bit more about that in a minute. But I might just now then, I know Jennifer was going to offer to go to look at the chat box and maybe ask some questions that have come up. So I don't know if you mind doing that, Jennifer.
And as she's looking, I will just let Sean know that Janice is here. She had trouble. She wanted to let us know she was here and in big support of this project. There you go. She had trouble joining, but wanted to pop on and lend her support. So Janice, just saying.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this has been a long-standing thing for me since I started this. It's any of the mining exposures or exposures from any workplace where that contribute to occupational disease, and diesel exhaust is a killer. And it's as Sandra Norman pointed out there in her presentation, this has been going on for decades where the standard is high, and it's really important to focus on this change, and anything I can do to support that I will. I do want to say all of the presentations were fantastic. I missed about the first 25 minutes trying to get on WebEx, so I apologize. But it's really important, I think, if you want to talk about engagement, because a lot of the communication is how do we get this out to the audience, but we also have to be receptive, and I know everyone here would be, to the feedback that we're going to get from that, and be willing to adapt, because of that. So some of these workers are not going to want to switch to electric vehicles because of some of the concerns with fire hazards and stuff in the mines. Others, you know, may not want to put on their badges to measure the diesel exhaust particulate if they think that that now means that they're going to have to wear, you know, a hazmat suit to work, because that it's hard for them to work under those conditions. So I'm hoping that, you know, as we go out in the community, I'm going to be trying to nail down some places that we can go out to, or be one of the volunteers to go out to engage with people, that we listen to what they have to say as well, and when they, and be willing to adapt to that, because that's how we get people involved, and they know that this is going to be a service to them, and that change is possible, as you pointed out. So anything I can do to support them on it.
Thanks so much, Janice. I mean, all of the learnings that we've got from your advocacy and the great work with the McIntyre Powder Project, you know, the great advice you can provide, and we really appreciate that. And having, I mean, I feel like I'm a team member on this, which really, it feels great. You know, we can all work together like this as well.
So
I like,
if you're asking people to do things, they will
Sorry?
engage when they know that you're coming from a place of service. If we're here to serve them, because what we're doing, all of these efforts that everyone is doing, is to serve these workers and to serve their families and to make it safer for them. So I think that if we're doing that for them, you know, then filling in a form is not so bad. So.
fabulous. So I just got a text from Kimberly. I will look at the chat box and try and answer some of the questions.
Well, I'm happy to back you up, Kevin. You're right. You see it. You wanted me to read the questions?
No, I can read it. So the first one's from Paul Sampara, and I've tried to answer it. Paul's basically talking about, do we have reliable historical pre-1908 exposure data for Ontario miners? So I guess, you know, as we're doing our retrospective exposure reviews and looking at our previous exposures, and, you know, are we seeing certain diseases as a result of past exposures, then we really need to understand what the past exposures are. So the problem is with pre-1980, there didn't exist then the NIOSH 54 method for measuring total carbon and elemental carbon. And respirable combustible dust was another method that was introduced in Canada. But the problem with respirable combustible dust is how low you can measure. It's not that easy to measure low levels using RCD. And I remember at the time thinking, why didn't Canada just use NIOSH 5040? So we don't know, we don't have reliable data back before 1980, but we can estimate, there are estimations made on, you know, what was the ventilation at the time, what kind of engines we used at the time, you know, what were the exposures to gases that might provide a bit of a surrogate to diesel particulate. But we're really jumping into the research area here as well, and we're also relying on the research as well. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add there. Okay, I don't know if that answers your question, Paul.
Yeah, partially. And yeah, and I mean, I put it out as a rhetorical question because I think we all know or recognize that there isn't good historical data on various aspects of diesel. And when you were saying about nitrogen oxides, again, we got very, very limited data, like in the OMED database. There's a little bit of data from the late 70s, but again, the way those samples were collected were not representative of worker exposure. There were area samples, they were often at ventilation shafts and that kind of stuff. It wasn't really meant for the purpose of estimating worker exposures. And also they were using things like Draeger tubes and, you know, very unreliable kind of measurement methods. So even the nitrogen oxides data that we have to try and correlate that, and there's issues around that, and there's been, you know, evidence to show that it's not probably all that reliable a way to go. unless you have a very defined situation and the only source of nitrogen dioxide is from the diesel engine. Anyway, so it was more of a rhetorical question. I know this is a challenge that we all face, and I just wondered if you know, the USW work, if they've come across any exposure data that, you know, we haven't seen.
You know, pre-1980, we don't really have much here. Like we have certainly claims, but from the WSIB that we're either allowed or not allowed. But you know, a lot of our work around there at that time was involved around the refinery process too, and the sinter plant and things like that. The data from underground, no, we wouldn't have a whole heck of a lot, just kind of documented you know, claims and numbers, right? Not actual hard data.
Yeah, and then you know, often the approach that we take is, you know, kind of semi-quantitative, you know, so, you know, using things like the Prunk data and, you know, the NIOSH monograph, and then kind of saying, well, you know, we know miners are you know, probably, you know, the most highly exposed, as we saw in the presentations, most highly exposed occupation when it comes to diesel exhaust, you know, and then sort of looking at those ranges that were measured in mines, and then sort of making sort of a, you know, some assumptions about, you know, how that might apply to, you know, particular miner's work history and that sort of thing. You know, and then there's that recent paper or the research by Debbia, the Quebec gold mines, you know, gives us another sort of marker, but it's a lot of hand waving estimates, and you know, and then we sort of plug in some various, you know, estimates into John's you know, lung cancer risk calculator, and as you saw, it doesn't take much to be at a significantly increased risk of lung cancer. So it's, yeah, semi-quantitative hand waving. I don't know how, and maybe that's all we can do for historical exposures to diesel exhaust.
It's so hard. We have such a mixed audience for these webinars, right? So thanks, Paul. But it's, you know, as Toby and Sandra just pointed out, we probably lost, you know, a bunch in the you know, hygiene discussion. But it's
I apologize.
So
Apologize.
no,
Sorry.
not at all. It's so important because we do have, and Sean was able to contribute. It's tough because it is a really mixed audience that we get to these things. But as Toby and Sandra pointed out, maybe we need to have those targeted, right? Who are you communicating with? You know, what are the communities? What is your objective, right? So it's you know, it's so fascinating when you pull it all together. But
I guess I wasn't following the right line between the different boxes of audience members, but anyway, sorry about that.
So the next question, I'm trying to step out of the esoteric hat that I've got on, is a question from Dan Kurtz to everyone. Do you have the LEL levels by province for diesel exhaust or DPM? So there was an interesting paper produced recently that I provided a hyperlink in my study, in my presentation. It was by Barn et al. Canada should move towards adopting harmonized evidence-based OELs to consistently and adequately protect workers. And, you know, just to add to that, there is a real issue here in Canada, because when you look at the limits between provinces, they're orders of magnitude and different. So, you know, and it's good to see Ontario leading the way, you know, setting a limit for all workplaces. So kudos to the ministry and to Marnie, you know, to taking the lead in that way, to actually putting us in the right direction. But I did provide a hyperlink in the chat box, and you will, when the presentation comes, you will be able to see that paper. But you can actually read about the disparity between the limits between the provinces, and which also was alluded to by Sean. But if there's any other comments on that, Sean, you wanted to add something there?
No, I'm pretty good, but I remember one of the first sessions we kind of had, and I have colleagues in Manitoba who we do the exact same type of mining, and they measure completely different and we're the same company. So you can imagine the difficulty in trying to strategize and work with other USW locals about what is the right OEL to be choose, and even within a company, like from mine site to mine site through it, because Valley being global, like there has to be a kind of global standard, and that everyone follows that is truly our position. Yeah.
Thanks. And just to add to that, like MDEC is an amazing organization. They've shared so much along these kind of lines, like controls, how to reduce exposure, and also comparing the limits and what needs to be done as well. And the people that kind of, some of the people that kind of drive MDEC are from CanMet. They do a lot of research through that organization there. So, I reckon people might want to have a look at the website and look at all the presentations and all the, the good controls. Because if you think about mining, really they kind of led the way, haven't they? I know we still got some way to go, but when you look at other workplaces like tunneling and transport and that, these other workplaces can probably learn a lot from what's done in mining as well. I don't really see any other questions there. Hold on, there's one. Oh yeah. Said RCD, respirable combustible dust, is fast and inexpensive, but all combustible material be collected and analysed. So it's not very accurate, and it also has a really high, what they call limit of detection. So you can't really measure diesel at a low enough level to really assess the risk these days as well. And Lawrence Kurt's engineering studies show that combustion timing injection methods can impact on gas emissions. Timing can impact soot, oxides of nitrogen, etc. And I just make mention that when I worked for BHP, we had a diesel testing team, and I used to go along with them sometimes. I was their supervisor, and they used to show to me, if you change the timing, so they'd actually fix the engine on the spot. They do the gas testing, and then they'd actually change the timing, and then they'd redo the gas testing. And just by changing the timing, the tuning, they could see there was a difference there as well. So that's the questions. We're 13 minutes to go, and I just wanted to also take this opportunity to just shout out to JP Mracek, who has really been a catalyst behind a lot of this as well. And he's done some phenomenal work with the USW. So I know Sean has an immense amount of respect for JP as well. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll just quickly go around and just any other comments, and then maybe hand back to you, Kimberly. So Sean, did you have any kind of closing comments before we go back to Kimberly?
Yeah, I've been thinking about what Paul was talking about, and I'm not going to go down the occupational hygienist kind of thing. And why, when we look at data like pre-1980s, why weren't we measuring this, or why don't we have good things? And I think about the history of mining and being generational. If you think about the 70s and the 80s and the health and safety that was going on in the mines, was diesel the top factor, right? We didn't know, we hadn't had 30 years of diesel in the mines. You have to remember there was air drills and a lot of electric tramming and things like that. And so was that a top of mind, or was it falls of ground and all sorts of other things that were fatally injuring our brothers and sisters at that time? And we've come to a point now in mining where a lot of rock bolting engineering has improved immensely. Not perfect, right? But the amount of fatalities from the 70s, 80s has diminished, and now we have data that started collecting in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s that's showing occupational disease is increasing as some of those workplace fatalities has decreased, right? And so, and a lot of when I go to every day of mourning, and we toll the bell for every brother or sister that was lost, we're still not giving the justice to the people that have passed away after they've left the mine site, right? And that's what this project's all about. And JP was someone when we were looking about engaging our members about this, that's someone who understood what was going on, someone who'd sat across the table from numerous widows and families, filling out WSIB forms, going to tribunal to find justice for these families, and really helping a lot of people. So, you know, the Workers' Compensation Board always has had a prevention aspect to it, and then that's kind of what we want to do and inspire, you know, my members not only to fill out their exposures and document, but we want the Workers' Safety Insurance Board to realize that we don't want to have to go through claims and everything. We want them to adopt a limit that benefits employers, workers, and you know, the province of Ontario. And so yeah, that's been the impotence, and that's always been the drive from the start.
Thanks so much, Sean, about prevention as well. It's sort of really important, prevention. And I'm just thinking, like what you were saying about, you know, what people were exposed to pre-80s. And I was thinking even about my dad's situation. You know, he was probably exposed to some or a lot of diesel exhaust, but he was also a roof boulder. So he would have been exposed to silica too, most likely. So it's not just diesel, like silica is also confirmed lung carcinogen. So it's really looking at all the hazards together rather than isolation. Over to you, Sandra.
Thanks. Powerful stuff there, Sean. I guess I reflect back on what Janice was talking about, and you know, the pushback around this initiative, and what I want to remind people, I guess, and what I would want the take-home message around that is that, and you pointed it out, Kevin, in your presentation, the technology has come a long way. A lot of the mines are already achieving significantly lower numbers. But if you can't put an OEL behind it to force the regular measurement and to force the continued improvement in the technology, then we're not going to continue to see the rapid declines in the levels, right? It just seems like a no-brainer. So I get the discomfort behind EDVs, and I think, sure, that's not the only solution. And you know, as you said again, at MDEC, there were lots of great presentations like on-demand ventilation, right? There are other ways that people are making meaningful declines in the diesel particulate matter exposure in the mines. We can already do much better. I personally can't see why the ministry won't champion this cause, because it's already achievable to some extent. I think, yes, there are some companies that are going to need help to achieve it, but that help's available too. And so it's not, we're not trying to say that electric vehicles are the only solution. There are a lot of solutions that are available today. You know, I always still remember when I reached out to MASHA back in 2003 and I said, why did you pick 160? And they said, because that's the level we think we can achieve with the technology that we currently have. And that was in 2003. So we're there. We just have to continue to drive it, and you drive it by setting the standard and making the measures. And I think, you know, elemental carbon is the one that people are drifting towards, largely because it's so specific to diesel that at least we're telling the mines to measure the right thing so that they can feel like and know that they're complying with the standard. So yeah, that's my frustration point. We can do this. I think we've been pulled in so many directions with all of the other crises, but today is the day for diesel. Okay, pandemic. You know, I know there's always stuff happening, but today, let's say diesel's the day. Okay, and let's lower the OEL. That's all I'll say.
Thanks so much for your input, Sandra. Wonderful, wonderful. Over to you, Toby. Like, what a fabulous presentation to look at it through your lens as well. So just closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, just actually, I'll also kind of piggyback off what Janice said, because I thought that was a great point. And we've even got like a term for that. So back in the day, it used to be called like the transmission model or the deficit model of like science communication, where it's like, okay, we've got the knowledge and now we're giving it to you because you don't have it. Well, it's not. It's that dialogue, just like Janice was talking about, and just like Dr. Dorman was like, it's that back and forth, and we're sharing knowledge, and you know, and that's what we're hoping to do on this, and it's like sharing knowledge to get to that really, you know, important goal for that. But yeah, and it's just been, you know, a pleasure to work with everyone on the project. So thank you.
Thanks, Toby, the voice of the worker, so important. Listening to what everyone's saying here. So we've got a few minutes left. I might just hand it back to Kimberly now, just for her closing words and just for the thoughts and to close out. So, and I just want to thank everyone again.
Yeah, just right back at you on getting old, Sandra. Come on, that's that's not fair. So yeah. You're way too young for that. And thanks to Kevin and Andrew Zarnke, who is a major part of this project from our team at OHCOW, and all the folks working on the McIntyre powder projects, Paul and Martin and Donna and Brittany, and it's endless, along with Janice. And Sandra said it earlier about this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary teams. That's how we find solutions. And this, I've learned so much in this session. And Toby, I think everybody needs to have Toby's expertise on their team and Sandra's expertise on their team. And this is how we're going to make change. We have the voices, we have the reality, we have science, but sometimes we confuse everybody with the science and then we lose them, right? It's like we want, don't steal Toby. Okay, Sandra, I won't steal Toby. But yeah, we sometimes are our own worst enemies, I guess, when it comes to some of this stuff. And we don't have all the answers. We like to pretend, I don't know, or it's changing, are perfectly acceptable answers as well, right? Like there are different ways to measure this stuff, and we probably weren't the best at doing it all the way along. We hope we get even better at it, right? So I think that also needs to be said. We want to bring the most emerging science and then get it to the people who can make a difference. So yeah, I just very, very excited for today, and thanking you very much, and hope you can join us next week at our continuing October session. So same time, same place. Thanking all our speakers today. We're going to talk about occupational exposures and community responses next week, again with a voice of a worker from a healthcare professional perspective, along with our community health centers that have been leading out the Healthy Nail Workers Salon projects, and Dr. Hugh Davies, who will speak about his research on cytotoxins and healthcare workers. The week thereafter, we have, again, worker-informed science showing the voice of the worker in the learning process and collaboration similar to today at the provincial, national, and international levels, with some of our work at OCCOW, along with IARC and Health Canada and our International Association of Firefighters. So we have a good mix. And then hopefully, as Kevin alluded to, on November 24th, we'd like to show you how we're trying to make all this easier by helping mobilize this knowledge and create tools that prevent people from needing us and our services and these efforts in the future. So yeah, we really thanks everyone for coming again. Thanks to all the speakers and to all of Tony and Lisa and Jennifer in the background making all this happen. So stay tuned, join us for the next 3 weeks, and thank you for all your contributions.
And just finally, for those of you who are still here, go to www.dieselparticulateproject.com and see the awesome job that's been done on the website design. So if you have a chance, go and check it out. Thank you.
Excellent. Cheers, everyone. Happy day.